Welcome to Impact Makers Radio, featuring industry thought leaders sharing problem-solving insights to help grow your business and live the life you love. And here's your host, Stewart Andrew Alexander.
Hi, and welcome to another Let's Talk Divorce conversation. And on this segment of the show, I have family law and estate planning attorney Neil Tyra of the Tyra Law Firm, who's calling in all the way from the Washington D.C. metro area. Now, Neil has a wealth of experience in the area of family law and estate planning, and we'll be talking to you today. Now, listen to this. He's going to be talking to you today about the importance for all people contemplating marriage to complete a pre-nuptial agreement. And this doesn't apply just to rich people, but for everybody else as well. So, if you're out there and that's the case for you, you're in the throes of getting married, you're contemplating, you're planning, this show is for you. So it's time to down tools, sit back and tune in, have a listen to what Neil has to share with us today. So with that said, let's not keep him waiting any longer, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show, Neil.
Well, Stuart, thanks ever so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
You are so welcome. So, Neil, we've got a short amount of time, so let's just jump straight in. Can you briefly, in your own words, describe the kinds of people you serve and the various types of situations they find themselves in when they come to you for help?
Well, thank you. I'm a family law attorney and an estate planning attorney. So what that means is I help people go through difficult transitions in their lives, that being the dissolution of a marriage or the breakup of a partnership that frequently encompasses challenges as to who is going to raise children that are the product of that relationship or marriage. And then on the tail end, I do a lot of estate planning, which helps families and individuals preserve their wealth and control where their assets go when they pass away. So really, I start with families at the beginning when they're just creating a family through marriage and children and the like, and then at the end of life's needs when they're planning for the transition of their accumulated wealth to their descendants and others through the estate planning process.
Okay, Neil, then keeping in mind that anything you share with us today is not legal advice or legal assistance, can you briefly share one of the most common misconceptions? And I'm sure there are so many that you've come across in the years of being a family law attorney. But can you just share the most common misconceptions surrounding the importance of prenuptial agreements?
Yeah, I think that the primary misconception is that people have the belief that a prenuptial agreement is only for the rich and famous. And I think it's because we most often hear about prenuptial agreements when we are, in fact, talking about the rich and famous, celebrities, movie stars, sports personalities. That's usually our introduction to the concept of a prenuptial agreement. And therefore, we think that those are the only types of people that would benefit from going through the process of creating a prenuptial agreement. But in truth of fact, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, I make the argument that everybody who is contemplating marriage, whether they have anything or they don't have anything, would benefit from a prenuptial agreement. Because what happens in the breakup of a marriage is, it's a stressful and oftentimes sad situation. There's a lot of anxiety and there's a lot of energy and animosity sometimes going back and forth between the parties. And one of the things that happens in a divorce is you split up all the property that was acquired during the marriage. And that gets to be a complicated process. Factors that come to bear on that decision are things like, well, was this property owned by one of the parties prior to the marriage? And they brought it to the marriage. If so, how is it treated when the marriage is dissolved? Or was this property acquired during the marriage by way of inheritance? A family member gave this property, whether it be money or tangible property, to one of the partners in a marriage during the marriage. So, and if so, how is that treated? Mm. Or let's say one party in the marriage is the primary breadwinner and was the one responsible for bringing home most of the financial income of the partnership that grew during the marriage, and the other one was typically raising the children or running the household. Well, how does that come into play? How do you consider that when the marriage dissolves? Mm-hmm. And so those kinds of scenarios are pervasive amongst everybody, not just the rich and famous. And a prenuptial agreement can address the kinds of situations and as a result, remove any of the anxiety, the animosity, the energy, the confusion, and certainly can make the whole process easier and clearly quite a bit cheaper.
This is so interesting, Neil. Based on what you just shared with us, and obviously keeping your client's confidentiality in mind, mm-hmm. Can you share an example of how you've actually helped someone who came to you with those anxieties, with those challenges, those misconceptions that you just described, and what kind of transformational results you were able to gain for them?
Well, sure. I think the most common scenario is when one party has more financial resources than the other going into the marriage. And so they typically will approach an attorney separately without the spouse and say, listen, I'm contemplating getting married. I'm just a little concerned because I have a successful business, or I've been in business or worked for a number of years and have created some wealth on my side, but my spouse hasn't had the same opportunities and is not quite in the same financial position. And so I'm just a little bit concerned. I bring more financially to the marriage than they do. And so how do I protect myself? Is a prenuptial agreement something that I should consider? And in that situation, I say, absolutely, you should do that. But before you can get to an agreement, there are some considerations that have to take place, and we have to bring everybody in openly and treat everybody equally so that each of the parties understands what they're getting into by entering an agreement. And when they do enter an agreement, what then happens is that if you get to a point where marriage is dissolving and you go for divorce, the states here in the U.S. typically have laws that determine who gets what or how much. You hear, 50-50 split or community property states, what have you. All of them say unless there's a pre-existing agreement. And then if the pre-existing agreement is in place and it's legal, it meets all the criteria for a valid prenuptial agreement, well, then the property will be dispersed and distributed in accordance with that agreement. And there's no arguing about it. Mm-hmm. So the tangible benefit is if you do the agreement up front, tuck it away, if then you need it at the end of the marriage, that agreement controls the disbursement of marital property. And it's not something that you then have to litigate. It's not something that you have to spend lawyers to fight about and spend months and years in court trying to figure out who gets what. You've already decided. You've decided ahead of time. And that's the typical scenario in which the benefit is most obvious to the parties.
Okay, Neil. So we're talking to people contemplating marriage and who it might be beneficial to complete a pre-nuptial agreement. That's our topic for today. And we're also, this is not just for the rich, as you have just expanded on. So with that in mind then, Neil, and for those people who are wanting to know more, what's the most common unknown pitfall that you'd like to bring to their attention today? And again, just like the misconceptions, I'm sure there are so many pitfalls that you could share with our audience today. But what's the most common unknown pitfall that you come across?
Well, you have to make sure that when the agreement is drawn up, that it meets all the requirements of a valid agreement. And that's where an attorney obviously comes into play and is most helpful. The most common pitfall is when one party isn't being exactly truthful with the other party in hopes of trying to preserve an advantage that they believe they have going into the marriage and want to continue to have, throughout and when the marriage is over. So, for instance, one of the things that you have to do, each party has to disclose all of their holdings going in, everything that they have, lock, stock, and barrel, so that both parties can make an agreement with full understanding and full appreciation for what they're agreeing to. Well, the most common problem you have is when one party fails to list, that vacation property in the Cayman Islands because they don't think their spouse is going to find out about it. And then when they do, and the agreement is brought before the court, the whole agreement can be thrown out based on the fact that the party who failed to disclose wasn't truthful. So that's one example. Or I had a client who I actually represented for another matter who came to me one time and said, I'm getting married. And I said, congratulations. And I'd like for you to do a prenuptial agreement for me. I said, I think you're a smart person. You've been listening to me. He said, yeah, we'd like to come in on Friday, if that's okay, to talk to you about doing the agreement. And I said, fine. And they came in on Friday dressed in a wedding gown and a tuxedo.
Not on the day of the wedding, you're kidding
And I said,
me.
What are you doing? And they said, well, we're going to do the agreement now and then go across the street to the courthouse and get married. I said, no, it doesn't work that way.
Oh, my goodness.
Because then you have the appearance of coercion. You have the appearance that the economically advantaged spouse is saying, you got to do this agreement or we're not walking across the street and getting married.
Right.
So those are the kinds of things that you have to look out for. And you also have to make sure that the agreement is what we call is not unconscionable. In other words, it can't be so one-sided in one party's favor over the other as to offend the senses.
So, Neil, I can understand for people contemplating marriage if they have a lot of money and lots of assets, houses, cars, etc. But you're also talking to people who are not rich, people who don't have, a high net worth. There must be some kind of awkwardness when one brings that topic up. Hey, I think we should get a prenuptial. Isn't that an awkward thing to talk about or even to bring to the table in the first instance?
Well, it certainly can be. And one of the things that I tell my clients is if your relationship is such that you can't talk about an establishing an agreement that would make our life easier in the long run and fair and beneficial to both of us, if you can't talk about that before you get married, then maybe you need to explore the quality of your relationship altogether.
Good point.
Because it's a very important issue. So one of the things I suggest, and this is true for couples of very little worth. I've had young couples, straight out of college or in some cases straight out of high school who have literally nothing. And I counsel them, I think you need to do a premarital agreement. And they're saying, what the hell for? We've got nothing to fight over. And I say, well, The only time you can do a premarital agreement is before you get married. You don't know what's going to happen in the next 10 years, the next 20 years. You may be very successful. I hope you're extremely successful. You may be the next .com billionaire. You might be the next, famous cricket player. We don't know what the future is going to hold. So we write a prenuptial agreement in a way that is that understands the potential that life does change. And we want to make those decisions now. And in some cases, it's really easy to make them now because they're theoretical. We don't have anything. So let's just talk conceptually. What do we do, God forbid, if we do end up in a divorce? One of the ways to do that is to say, all right, we're going to make sure that whatever we came to the marriage with in our name stays in our name. And if we leave the marriage, it remains in our name. So if I have, a small amount of stock that my grandparents gave me, it's really kind of a sentimental thing because my granddad worked for U.S. Steel and gave me this stock when I was a little boy. I'm going to keep that stock. It's going to stay in my name. And oh, by the way, after 30 years, apparently the market went up and now it's worth a lot of money. Well, it's going to stay on my side of the ledger because that's the agreement we made when we had virtually nothing and the stock was not worth what it is now. Or at the same time, we say during our marriage, we are going to title things either in my name, your name, or our name, with the understanding that if the marriage ends, however it's titled is going to determine where it goes. So if it's titled, if we buy a car and we put it in your name and the marriage breaks up, that car goes to you. If we buy a house and it's in both of our names, well, we're going to sell the house and split the proceeds. See, all those decisions are made in accordance by how the asset is titled. And if you make that agreement up front, when you have nothing, when you have no house, when you have no car, then it simplifies things at the end should the marriage dissolve. One of the things just to think about, it's hard to counsel people to do something in contemplation that this joyous union they're about to enter into might dissolve. You don't wish bad luck on anybody. But the fact of the matter is that 7 out of 10 marriages end in divorce. You're far more likely to get divorced than you are to remain married 32 years as I have done. It's statistically more in line that a divorce is going to happen. So why not plan for that potentiality so that if it does happen, it's bad enough that it does happen, but we're not going to make it worse by fighting over every penny because we've got a prenuptial agreement in place that controls everything and makes our life infinitely easier in the end.
So, Neil, you shared a lot of great information in a very short amount of time. So, and I'm sure that anybody who's out there listening to you right now would want to know a little bit more about who you are. So if you could just briefly tell us a little bit about yourself, and especially in terms of your background and your education and experience as it relates to the topic of family law.
Well, thank you for that opportunity, Stuart. I'm one of those people that can't really decide what he wants to be when he grows up. The law is my fourth career. I went to law school fairly late in life. My children were about ready to head off to college, and I decided that I had always really wanted to go to law school, and then decided that if I didn't try it now, it never would happen. So before that, I owned a martial arts studio, and I ended up selling the martial arts studio, and that paid for me to go to law school. And I went to law school with the idea that I was going to join the prosecutor's office and put bad guys in jail. in the end, I ended up doing family law and really liked the opportunity to really help people through difficult times. And a lot of what I did in the beginning was help uh, mostly, but not exclusively, women who were in abusive relationships and how they could extricate themselves from that relationship, protect both them and their family and their children. And that gave me a lot of satisfaction in terms of being able to look in the mirror and know that I was doing something that would benefit somebody's life. And through the course of experiencing that and moving on to a broader range of family law topics such as divorce and custody and child support decisions, I then branched out and started doing, as we said earlier, more estate planning because I wanted to help people continue to plan in their lives, continue to make their lives easier down the road. And estate planning was a natural outgrowth of my family law practice. So I've been in as a solo practitioner for 15 years now, and continue to focus on family law and estate planning. I also do host my own podcast called The Law Entrepreneur that I help young attorneys who are contemplating going solo or older attorneys who are transitioning from larger law firms into a solo practice, help them establish their law firms and grow them to a profitable business. And so between those things and learning to play the guitar and struggling with my golf game, I try and stay a little bit as busy as I can.
And looking like the American version of James Bond, you forgot that part too.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but I do enjoy a martini.
Okay, moving on then, Neil. I'd like you just to picture, if you could, the kinds of people who come to you and want to know more about pre-nuptial agreements. So with that in mind then, Neil, what final thoughts would you like to leave with them before we get your contact details and end the show?
Well, thank you. I mean, I think the ideal client for me, or the typical client for me, is that young couple usually in their late 20s. They've gone through university or college. They've got some education. They're embarking on exciting careers. They've met the love of their life, and they want to get married and eventually start a family and purchase a home and do all those things that we associate with entering a successful period of life. Mm-hmm. And I want them to come to me and do the things that are going to make their lives easier and less stress filled. Ironically, even though I'm a family law attorney, I don't like conflict. I don't really like arguing. I don't really like beating each other up over trivial or silly things, typically. And so a prenuptial agreement, I think, is one of the principal tools that we have to make our lives easier. That and a good estate plan. If I have a prenup agreement and a good estate plan that controls who's going to take care of my children if I get hit by a bus, and where does my money go if that happens, and a prenup agreement that helps me divide the property if this marriage of ours disintegrates, well, then I've gone a long way to easing my own mind. And I feel as an attorney, I've gone equally far in terms of helping you achieve some level of peace. So that's why I do what I do. That's what makes me feel that it's worthwhile.
That was Neil Tyra. Thank you so much for sharing so generously with us today, Neil. You certainly have demonstrated without any doubt whatsoever that you are a true educator and advocate for your client's success. So thank you.
Well, I do appreciate it, Stewart. And if any of your listeners want to learn more or follow up and ask a question, you can check out my website at www.tyralawfirm.com. That's Tyra law firm, all one word, tyralawfirm.com, or drop me an email at Neil Tyra, Neiltyra, again, all one word, Neil Tyra at tyralawfirm.com. I'd be happy to exchange thoughts and continue the conversation if need be.
Thank you so much for sharing your contact details with us, Neil. I'll also ensure that they are on the website along with your show notes. So I'd also like to say a big thank you to you, the listener, for taking the time out of your busy day to join us on this very insightful and informative discussion with one of the top family law and estate planning attorneys in the Washington D.C. metro area. Don't forget, his name is Neil Tyra. Check him out, as he said. Send him an email, give him a call. I'm sure you're going to be in a great place to take a few baby steps into the right direction. So again, I'm Stewart Andrew Alexander, and we'll be back shortly with some more leading divorce professionals in this, our series of Let's Talk Divorce Conversations. So until then, take care, have a great day, and we'll talk real soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Impact Makers Radio. To listen to all past, present and future industry thought leaders and trendsetters, visit us at impactmakersradio.com.